Hello history buffs and welcome back to my channel for another video. Today we're going to be talking about representation and assassination. So how did I get to be thinking about this topic in particular? Representation might be a more obvious piece because we just had an election here in the United States of America, but assassination less so. We haven't had an assassination in a very long time, thank goodness. So where is that bit coming from? Well, I used to work at the United States Capitol, and one of the things that we were encouraged to do a lot of research into the different figures and the different statues that we had to talk about, because if we had a visitor from, for example, Louisiana, it would be nice to be able to know a thing or two to say about Huey Pierce Long, who is one of their two statues. Every state gets two different figures to represent their history and what they think is important to them. So I know a tidbit or two about just about every state in the Union and the people that they think are most important. But some of them were more interesting to me personally than others. Now the reason why I bring up Huey Long in particular is that he was a very big and bold personality, and he had a lot of very out there ideas. His personality was very go get 'em, get it done. He was actually impeached as governor of Louisiana, partially because of actual corruption, which okay, actual corruption. But then there's this other side where when you have a very split system of politics, not a system of government, a system of politics, and you've got some people who believe one thing and other people who believe something completely different, you end up with people, when the other group is in power, they feel so personally attacked by the fact that they're not the ones in power, that they want to do something about it. They impeach or they assassinate. Now, Huey Pierce Long was not assassinated as governor of Louisiana. He was assassinated while he was the senator in the United States government from Louisiana. And he was, at the time, he was running for president of the United States, so there is a bit of a conspiracy theory saying that it was an inside job by Roosevelt, who was running for re-election at the time. But his assassination got me thinking. What does it do to our democratic process? And what does it mean when someone is a leader of a movement? And he was a leader of a movement. I mean, he was one of the most public senators in our history. He had a radio show. He was one of two politicians at the time who had a radio show. It was him and Roosevelt, and a fifth of the country listened to him. He was very, very popular. He actually did have a chance, we think, against Roosevelt. But not only was he very popular, he was also pretty socialist. He had ideas about wealth caps and minimum wages and universal health care and all of these ideas that we're still grappling with today, almost 100 years later. So they were very progressive at the time, and he got some flack for it. But not only flack, but he got killed. Now, killing someone that you disagree with is obviously a crime. Obviously, you shouldn't kill someone because of their beliefs. But when somebody is a U.S. senator and they have ability to change policies and even systems based on their beliefs, and when they're backed by a fifth of the country thinks that they're right, this is the person that they're organizing around. And, well, if you don't agree with that fifth of America, you can silence them pretty quick by killing their representative. So in this sense, assassination is not just murder, but it is a disruption of the democratic process itself. Because when you vote a representative into office and that representative is killed by someone else, they are not voted out of office, they are not impeached because they didn't follow policies and they didn't follow the law. They were killed in an undemocratic way. They were killed. And this means that your votes, your right to be represented, is undermined. And that is what makes assassination so much different than murder itself. But the implications go further than just murder versus assassination. Because as the summer wore on, I kept thinking to myself, how will I, when I go back to the museum world, when I go back to teaching, how am I going to teach Black history? And there are lots of different ways to teach diverse history, but it has to look different than how we teach Rankian history, Great White Man history. Because when you teach Great White Man history, you have these figures to look up to when they are the landowners, the wealthy, the innovators, who they're the ones who both the narrative is centered around them, and they're the ones who control the narrative. Now, when you write Black history, you can do one of two things. You can write about the handful of people who are well known and their philosophies and their impact on the world are well documented. Or you can fundamentally revolutionize the way that we talk about history. You can take control of a more populist narrative and look at big data. You can look at the narratives that individuals left behind, oral histories, diaries. You can take history back to the source. Same thing with women's history as compared to feminist history. Women's history, you look at the Jane Austens and the Susan B. Anthonys and the ones that you can name. Feminist history looks at systems that women lived under, influenced, took part in, and sought to change. These are huge differences in looking at history and considering how history is written. And I think one of the big reasons is that the right of assembly, the right to elect a leader, the right to have leaders in any sense is often stymied in our history. Because if you aren't the political majority, majority of power, even if you're not the numeric majority, it's very hard to assemble, it's very hard to petition, it's hard to be collective, and it's hard to have a leader. And when you do have a leader, oftentimes they will be either removed or assassinated. And so not only is assassination a disruptor of formal democratic processes, but it's also a disruptor of informal political processes as well. When you think through American history, there are so few situations where collection is allowed for political minorities. Again, not necessarily a numerical minority, women are a numerical majority, but a political minority in that they have the minority of the power. And so these women's groups are either scoffed at, Black groups are actively broken up, and the leaders are assassinated or arrested, which does much the same job. You remove the leadership and suddenly the civil rights movement is set back 20 years, for example, when Martin Luther King was assassinated. So this is just something I've been thinking about in terms of what does our historic process of refusing political minorities the right of assembly and the right of petition and even the right of free speech, what does that have an impact on how we write history today, the form of our history, what kind of historical theories we have to fall back on? And it absolutely changes it. It absolutely is shaped by the political landscape of the past. It changes the form and the theory and the philosophy of our history in the present. And it has to. If we're going to be respectful to the experiences of people, we have to decentralize it, especially when peoples were not allowed to centralize themselves. All right, thank you so much for watching my video. I hope you subscribe, like the video, comment, share with your history buff friends, and until next time, make history.